L'chaim. So, do we have any lawyers in the house? I don't know. I need some legal advice over here.
No.
See, I got involved. What?
We have one, but it's not here.
So we, yes, I got into some legal trouble, and I'm going to be having us a criminal trial pretty soon. And I was thinking, I was trying to come up with a good legal strategy, what I should do in court. And I came up with a really interesting strategy, and I wanted to run it by you guys. Let's hear what you guys think about it, okay? So I have a double whammy, a two stage strategy I'm gonna do in my upcoming court case. First thing is I got this very official looking letterhead, and I wrote out a letter. Stating that the date of the trial has been delayed, has been pushed off for 1 week. And I'm going to send this letter to the prosecutor. Now, the prosecutor is going to get a letter saying the trial was pushed off a week, so he's not going to come to court, hopefully, right? And that way I'll show up and the judge will declare me innocent. Now, this is an old-fashioned prosecutor. He still does everything by letter. He's not going to look at the website or anything like that. So that's my first idea. But just in case that doesn't work, I have a second strategy. See, when I go to court, I'm going to take this cowbell with me, okay? And I'm going to wait till the prosecutor starts making his case. He's going to get up in front of the whole court. He's going to start spinning the whole story about the terrible crimes that I committed. And as he's about to make his case, I'm going to pick up the cowbell, and everybody close their ears. And the whole court's going to stop. Everyone's going to look at me. The prosecutor's going to lose his focus. And by the time everything calms down, no one's going to even remember what he was saying. So that's my legal strategy. And if he tries again, I'll just pull out the cowbell again, and we'll start again. So I was wondering, what do you guys think? Do you think this strategy will work?
Not legal.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Are there laws against bringing a cowbell into court? I'm not sure. Maybe there's probably laws against forging letters, but I'm not sure. I mean. It sounds like even if it would be legal, I don't think a judge would be very excited about this. See, if I were to, my assumption is that any judge would probably hold someone like this in contempt of court, and most prosecutors probably wouldn't fall for a fake letter anyways. So there's a lot of flaws, a lot of problems with my strategy. But this is not really my strategy. This is our strategy. This is the strategy of our entire community in our upcoming court case this week, this Rosh Hashanah, right? So every morning for the last almost month, we've been getting up early and blowing the shofar. But this Friday, we have a brilliant strategy. We're going to stop blowing shofar. Why are we going to stop blowing shofar on Friday, Mendy? Friday. Because we want to trick the Satan. We want to trick the prosecutor and make him think that the trial's already over. And that way, hopefully, he won't make a case. Not only that, on Rosh Hashanah itself, even though it's Rosh Chodesh, we're not going to mention Rosh Chodesh in the prayers. Because we want to try to fool him and make him think, get him mixed up a little bit in the dates. That's our first strategy. Our second strategy is that on Rosh Hashanah itself, this year, at least on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we're going to take out a big horn and we're going to blow it 130 times. Right? Now the Gemara says, why do you need to blow it 130 times? You could blow it, 9 times, maybe 30, later it turned into 30. Let's do this 130 times. So the Gemara says that we do it to mix up the prosecutor. Right? The prosecutor is up in heaven, the Satan's up in heaven, making a case against us, and we have this big loud cowbell, this big loud shofar that's confusing and mixing him up. And obviously, there are 2 major problems with the whole story. The first problem is, the Satan's pretty smart. He doesn't get fooled so easily, and he doesn't get mixed up so easily. And how could we try the same strategy every year for, thousands of years, and he keeps on falling for it? Right? He didn't come up with earplugs or something. You can come into court with it's not that hard. You can come up with a workaround for this. That's the first problem. The second problem is an even more serious problem. Right? Hashem is the judge. Which judge allows somebody to get up in his court and start blowing a horn to confuse the prosecutor? Doesn't sound like a very. So are you saying we have a biased judge who's our father? Okay, that I guess that could work, but he's supposed to be a fair judge as well, right? So what's going on over here? So it was in the city of Berditchev, Rosh Hashanah morning, and the great tzaddik Reb Levi Yitzchak was davening for the Amos. He was davening. He was singing the prayers, and he came to a special poem in the middle of the prayers in Rosh Hashanah morning in Shacharis, which is called Lekeil Oyrech Din. Hashem, Chaim. We're discussing our legal strategy for an upcoming court case. Trying to figure out if this is going to work. I was telling everybody that our strategy this year is to go into court, and whenever the prosecutor starts to speak, we're going to start banging our cowbell, right? And we're also going to try to confuse the prosecutor, make him mix up the dates or something. Send him a letter, letting him know that we changed the dates of the trial. But I tried to run this by my lawyer, and he told me it's not really going to work. The judge is going to hold me in contempt of court. It's not the
cowbell, especially.
Yeah, the cowbell in court is not going to work. It's so we're trying to figure out what's going on. Where do we come up with this legal strategy? How does the Sultan fall for it? And so he's saying we have a biased judge who lets us get away with it. That's one good theory, but it also has to be, he has to give up an appearance of neutrality in the court, right? So it was in the city of Berditchev, Rosh Hashanah morning, and Reb Levi Yitzchak was davening for the Amutz, and he began the beautiful poem Lekeil Oyrech Din. Hashem, who runs the court, who puts forth judgments, and right in the middle of this beautiful poem, suddenly his eyes close, his face turns red, and he covers his face with his talus. And all the Hasidim realized that Reb Levi Yitzchak's neshama was not with us, was not in shul anymore. It had ascended up to heaven. And for a few minutes, everyone was quiet. They were waiting. And after about 10 minutes, he opens up his eyes. He lifts the talus from his face, and he calls out in the middle of the poem. He calls out the words "Lekoine avadav badin." Hashem acquires his servant. He buys his servant or his slave in judgment. And then he continued davening. After davening, the Hasidim went over to the Rebbe and they said, "Well, what was happening over there? What was going on? For 10 minutes you disappeared, and then you came back and you said that Hashem buys his servant in judgment. What does that even mean?" And he said, "Let me tell you. It's Rosh Hashanah, and there's a big court case going up in heaven, and I wanted to be involved, right? So my neshama went up to heaven, and I come to the gates of heaven, and I see there's a big traffic jam. And I look, and I see there's 30 wagons waiting to go into heaven. And the wagons are loaded with merchandise. And I come closer, and I look, and I see who's leading the wagons, and guess who? It's the prosecutor. It's the Sultan. He has 30 wagons behind him. And I'm starting to get a little nervous, and I get closer to the wagons, and the wagons are full of sins, full of Jewish sins that he had collected over the last year. And he has a big smile on his face. He's bringing these sins to court, right? He has his case, ironclad case against the Jewish people, and I'm getting very nervous. I don't know what to do. How am I going to defend against 30 wagon loads of sins? This is a tough case. And at that moment, something happened. A Jew committed a sin on Rosh Hashanah itself. And the Sultan became very excited. He could add to his wagon loads of sins. So he left the wagons right where they were, and he went right down into the world to grab up that new sin that just came along. On Rosh Hashanah. In the meantime, I was a little curious. I wanted to check out these sins. So I approached the wagon. I started looking through these sins, and I saw, this, at first it looked like big, scary sins, but once I started looking at them, I realized that, they're certainly not as serious as they look, right? The first sin I pick up a sin in my hand. It's this dark, black, red sin. Baruch stole. He's a robber. He stole from the local grocery shop. A terrible, dark, black sin. But then I look a little closer. What did he steal? He stole a loaf of bread. Okay, it's not a big black sin. Now it's turning into a gray sin, right? Then I look a little closer. Why did he steal the loaf of bread? Because his 5 children were hungry and hadn't eaten the day before. Now the sin's is turning a lighter shade of gray. It's starting to turn, and I'm looking at it, and I'm looking a little closer, and I see that the night before, his children weren't able to fall asleep. They were crying. They were hungry. And now the sin is not gray anymore. It's a white, soft little white sin. And then I look a little deeper, and I see that he never even intended to steal. He intended to pay. He just didn't have money, and he was planning when he got the money, he should pay back, and it just didn't end up happening yet. Hopefully he'll get the money soon. And as I'm looking at it, this little tiny white sin is getting smaller and smaller. It melts and it dissolves in my hands. Right? I pick up the next sin. Right? Chaim was praying in the morning, and instead of focusing on his prayers, he was just reading the words, and he's in the middle even stopped. He started thinking about other things, a terrible, dark, black sin. And I started looking, what was going on? What was he thinking about? Oh, he was thinking that his rent is due the next day, and he doesn't have a penny to his name? Okay, this is not such a serious sin anymore. It's starting to turn gray. And then I realized that the local nobleman threatened to throw him and his family in prison if he doesn't pay up. And he was nervous, he was worried about it, and that's what he was thinking about during his prayers. And the sin is slowly becoming smaller and whiter. And then I look a little closer, and I realized that he was trying to focus on his prayers. He was doing his best. He came in the morning, and he said, I'm going to focus today on my davening. And he tried so hard, but his mind was so distracted, he couldn't focus. And the sin disappeared. It dissolved in my hands. And one by one, I pick up one sin after the other. And within a few minutes, there were no sins left. The wagons were empty. Right? It was all gone. And at that moment, the Satan comes running back up with that one good, juicy sin that he got. And he looks at his wagons and he starts yelling, robbers, robbers, I've been robbed. And he looks around and he sees me. And he figured out the whole story right away. And he grabs me by my beard and he said, you thief. You got to pay up. You got to give me back the stolen goods. I told him, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. I don't have anything to pay you with. And he says, no, you need to pay me double. You're a thief. And I said, I don't have any sins to give you.
How excited.
Right? So he says, I'm taking you to the court. So they bring me in front of the heavenly court. And the heavenly court says it's a thief who doesn't have money to pay has to be sold as a slave. Satan's very excited. He grabs me. He tells me he's going to bring me. He schleps me to the slave market right in the middle of heaven. There's a big market there. And he says, who wants to buy Vlevi Yitzchak of Erditchev? Right? And most of the angels are walking by. Nobody wants to have anything to do with me. They know I'm going to cause them more trouble than I'm worth. And the Satan himself is thinking, maybe this could be a good purchase. And at that moment, a big light appears. And Hashem himself appeared in the market. And he says, I'm going to buy it. And the Satan's like, whoa, this is a heavy price over here. 30 wagon loads. It costs a lot of money. And Hashem's like, I can afford it. And I'm going to take care of it. He's mine. He's my servant. And that's why I got up. I opened my eyes and I said, L'koina avadav badin. Hashem will acquire his servant in judgment.
Satan's pretty stupid.
Huh?
What should he have done?
What?
Do you think he's going to buy a Vlevi and it's not going to cause him an issue?
I'm not sure what his plan was, but he was just desperate to recover something.
The guy, when he disappears for 5 minutes, takes the 139 of sins. It works with him when he's sleeping. You know what's going to happen.
So,
how did he pay off?
The truth is, how did Hashem pay? The story doesn't give us those details. But Hashem figured out a way to pay up.
Listen, one thing he left into the Satan live.
Hashem figured out a way to pay up. So, if we take a look at the Jewish sins on Rosh Hashanah, so at first glance it looks like big, dark, black, and red sins. But once you start looking closer at the sins, you realize that, most of the sins were not done willingly. Even those that appear to be done willingly. They were done based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And with any sin that we really look at, and we examine the circumstances around it, and we judge with a positive eye, the sin will fall apart, it'll melt, it'll dissolve, it'll disappear. The Rosh al-Torah in Parashat Bereshis. He writes that during the generations, a few generations after God created man began to sin. They started to commit all different types of sins. And the angels came in front of Hashem, and they said, Hashem, you see, we were right. We told you should have never created man. We told you. You didn't take our advice. Look what happened. Look at these terrible sinners that you made. Right? So Hashem turned to the angels, and he said, how can you judge man? How can you stand here and judge man? You don't have an evil inclination. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know their circumstances. Right? You don't have a Yetzer Hara. So the angels are like, Yetzer Hara? Who cares about a Yetzer Hara? We will take a Yetzer Hara any day. It's not going to change our behavior. Hashem says, you think so? You realize they're difficult circumstances they're in. They're in a physical world with physical desires and temptations. And the angel's like, that's not a problem for us. We'll take it any day. Right? So Hashem says, okay, let's try it. He takes a whole group of angels and he places them down into the world. And he gives them an evil inclination. And they start looking around and like, this place is pretty nice over here. So many good stuff. They start running around, immediately running around chasing after sin. From one sin to the other. They are running around, stealing, giving into their temptations, giving into their desires. And actually the Torah writes about this. The Bnei Elikim, the children of God, it says, began to sin. And the Rosh brings down the story from the Medrash that there was this girl, this young woman, beautiful young woman, and she was a good tzaddikas, and she's walking down the street, and suddenly a group of angels starts chasing her, right? And she's living in a world that's filled with sin, and her whole life she's trying to avoid sin, and suddenly she looks behind her and she sees a group of angels following her. And she tries to run away, but they're a lot faster than her. And they can fly, they can do whatever they want, right? And finally they corner her, and she turns around and she says to them, "You look very scary. I've never seen people with wings." And they're like, "We're angels. We're not people." She's like, "Your wings are very scary. You remove your wings." And they're like, "Sure, no problem, no problem." They take their wings off, they put it down on the ground, and the woman grabs the wings quickly before they have a chance to react, and she flies up to heaven. Right? These angels remain stuck in the world. They never got their wings back. Hundreds of years later, if you remember in Yaakov's dream when there was a ladder with the angels going up, according to the Rosh, the reason why the angels that were going up were these angels that got stuck, stranded, without their wings. And this young woman flies up to heaven, and she comes in front of Hashem, and she says, "Hashem, what do you want from us? What do you want from us? You put us down, and you put me down in this world, full of sin. Your own angels, your own servants, didn't last 5 minutes in this world, right? What do you want from us? Right? How could you hold us accountable if you put us in such a world?" And Hashem says, "You're right. You're right. You are in the world is a terrible and it's a very difficult place. But the test that I'm giving you is that every person in their life is going to have a time, even if they're sunk into the lowest depths of sin, there's going to be a moment when you're going to see in front of you a pair of wings. You're going to have an opportunity to lift yourself up. You're going to have an opportunity. Everybody in their lives has a time when they have an opportunity to lift themselves up. What I expect you to do is when you have that opportunity, I want you to grab those wings and fly it as high as you can. And if you do," Hashem says to this young woman, "I am going to take you and protect you. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to take you right now. I'm going to cover you with my talis," Hashem says, "and I'm going to place you up in the heavens so that everybody can see." And Hashem took this young woman and he placed her amongst the 12 constellations. And he set her the constellation of the Sula, Virgo. Hashem decided this is going to be the constellation for the month of Elul. Right? The month of Elul. The constellation of the month of Elul is this young woman who picked up the wings and ran away from sin. And Hashem says, I want you to be the symbol, right? That we're in a place that even the angels can't last for a few minutes if they are given our temptations, our problems. And no one can ask us to completely avoid this. But there's a time of the year, there's an Elul, there's a Hashanah, when we have an opportunity to fly up, to lift ourselves above the world around us. And Hashem says, that's all I expect you to do. I will lift you up to the heavens. Rabbi Naphtali of Ropshitz had a son Eliezer. He later became the Rebbe of Eliezer of Jacob. And Eliezer, as a young boy, was a bit of a wild boy, and he was once involved in a big prank or something. He did something that he wasn't supposed to do. And his father, Naphtali of Ropshitz, was not happy about it, and he called him in and he started talking to him, telling him what a terrible thing he did. And young Eliezer says to his father, he says, it's not my fault. It's not my fault, he says to his father. It was my Yetzer Hara who convinced me. I have a big, very tough Yetzer Hara, and he convinced me. So his father said, you have a Yetzer Hara? You fight against the Yetzer Hara. He says, no, my Yetzer Hara never lets me continue. I try to fight him off, but he comes back. I fight him off, he comes back a minute later, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, again and again. So his father says, so you have the greatest example, he says. Why don't you learn from your own Yetzer Hara? Your own Yetzer Hara, you push him away once, you push him away a second time, he keeps on coming back. Shouldn't that be a lesson for you?
You push him away every time?
Shouldn't you also, even if you have a tough time, you should continue trying? And little Eliezer says to his father, but there's one problem, he says, with your logic. He says, my Yetzer Hara doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. I have a Yetzer Hara. Right? I have a Yetzer Hara. And this is really the problem that happens every year at Hashanah. The Yetzer Hara, who is also the Satan, comes in front of Hashem. And he begins to prosecute the Jewish people. He brings his 30 wagon loads of sins, and he begins describing the terrible sins of the Jewish people. And Malach Michal gets up, and he says to the Satan, how could you accuse the Jew? How could you blame the Jewish people? Do you realize the difficulties they had? Do you realize the tsaris that the Jewish people went through this year? Do you realize their health problems, their financial problems, the whatever other tsaris they were experiencing? How can you judge them? And the Satan, of course, is an angel. And he says, who cares what problems they had? Who cares what worries and what sorrows they were going through? They have a mitzvah, they have a Torah from Hashem. How could that shouldn't affect them in any way?
I'm so righteous.
What?
He's so righteous.
So Hashem looks at the Satan, and he says, this is not right. This angel over here, who has never had a Yetzer Hara in his life, who never had a bad day in his life, who never went to the store and saw that inflation lifted the prices like 3 times as much, and he can't afford to buy anything, who never had to make a rent or a mortgage payment, he never had a credit card bill overdue, and he's standing there and judging the Jewish people. Hashem says, if the Satan wants to judge the Jewish people, we have to give him some tzaddis too. He also has to get some problems. He also has to have some troubles, some worries, some trials and tribulations. So Hashem gets up and he pulls out from under his throne a great large shofar. And he turns to the Satan and he says, you see this shofar? One day, very, very soon, I will take this shofar and I will blow this shofar. And you know what that means when I blow the shofar? You're finished. You're going to be completely destroyed. You're going to be shechted when I blow this shofar. And not only that, of course, that will happen one day in the future. But from now on, every single time that the Jewish people blow the shofar, every single year on Rosh Hashanah, every one of the 130 times that they blow the shofar and you hear it, you're going to immediately remember what I just told you. And you're going to be overcome with something that no angel has ever experienced. You're going to be overcome with fear, with worry, with confusion, with terror. You're going to begin to tremble every time you hear the shofar. And that way you're going to know what the Jewish people go through. And the Satan smiles. Okay, he's never heard of terror, fear, worry. He's an angel. He doesn't know what this is. And he says, okay, if that's God's decree, I accept it, right? I'm an angel. And he begins his prosecution, right? On Wednesday, Chaim Yankel got up and he didn't daven properly and he didn't learn and he wasted his time and he was involved in things he shouldn't be involved in. And Malach Michal gets up and he says, do you know what he was going through? Do you know do you realize he had a credit card payment that was due and he was worried about it? And I was like, who cares? Who cares what worries he had? And at that moment, and the Satan is standing in court and he begins to tremble. He's never trembled before in his life. He has this emotion that he has never experienced before. Fear, worry, terror. And he begins to shake. And he loses his train of thought. And the judge turns to him. He's like, what you were saying? And he's like, and he collapses on the floor. And he gets up. He's like, I don't remember what was going on. Where were we? And the judge is like, that's not how you make a case. That's not how you make a case. You're in the middle of talking. And he says, how can you blame me? I just experienced the worst emotion that an angel has never experienced before. I was scared. I was worried. I was confused. How can you blame me? And at that point, Malach Michal turns to the Satan and he says, you experienced one sada, one worry, one fear. And you had that same fear for the last few thousand years. And every time you hear that little shofar, you collapse, you get confused. You're so nervous, you lose track of the date. After 30 days of shofar blowing, you don't even know when Rosh Hashanah is. And you are trying to blame the Jewish people. The Jewish people have 10 such worries, 10 such fears every single day. And you're trying to blame them? How can you make a case against them? And that's why his whole claim falls apart. And that's what it means we confuse this up. Right? It's not, we're not disrupting the courts. We're not picking up the cowbell in the middle of the court and disrupting everything. We are making our case. We're coming in front of the court and we're saying this little fear, this confusion that the prosecutor is experiencing now is what we experience every single day. 10 times every single day. Right? How can you blame us? And that's why we turn to Hashem and we say, Hashem, that's why we're asking you for a happy, sweet year. We want to serve you. We want to do what's right. We don't want to sin. But we have so many problems in our life. Please, Hashem, give us good health. Give us parnasa. Give us nachas from our children. That way we'll be able to serve you properly. We won't have this confusion. And just to conclude with the story, probably said it before, about my great grandfather, Elimelech of Lezhensk, before Yom Kippur, one of his Hasidim, Chaim, comes to the Rebbe, to Elimelech, and to be with his Rebbe for the high holidays. And before Yom Kippur, he comes to the Rebbe with a special request. He says the Rebbe, Elimelech, every year, he does before, the night before Yom Kippur, he does kaparas. And the Rebbe's custom was that he did it in a room on his own, privately. And he says, I always wanted to see how the Rebbe does kaparas. So I was wondering if you could let me in this year. Maybe you could do it in public so we can all see. And the Rebbe says, I don't know, there's not much to see. I'm going to take the same chicken that everybody else is going to take. I'm going to swing it around my head 3 times just like everybody else. And I'm going to read the same words, nothing to see. And he says, no, I'm sure the Rebbe's kaparas is something special. I want to see it. And the Rebbe says, well, if you want to see a special kaparas, you're knocking at the wrong address. If you actually want to see a special kaparas, you have to go to the nearby village. Go to Baruch's house. Baruch's a simple innkeeper. He lives in the nearby village. And you should watch his kaparas. That's a special kaparas. Okay, Chaim is very excited. The Rebbe told him where to go. This must be a hidden tzaddik, right? So he runs to the nearby village, and he comes to Baruch, and he says, Baruch, you gotta let me stay with you. I want to see your kaparas. I know you're a hidden tzaddik, Baruch. And Baruch's like, well, it's so well hidden, I don't even know about it. It's pretty good, right? And he says, I'm here for kaparis, to spend kaparis with you. And he says, okay, I don't know why you would want to see my kaparis. And he says, okay. He says, I don't even have any chickens. I don't know what you want. We don't have any. I don't know what you want with my kaparis. He says, well, I'm here. The Rebbe sent me. Okay. They got up in the middle of the night to do kaparis. And Baruch turns to his wife. And he asks her to bring him the 2 notebooks. She goes into the next room and she comes back with 2 notebooks. Baruch opens up the first notebook and he starts reading. In this notebook, he had written down every sin that he had committed in the last year. Right? The day after Rosh Hashanah, it starts off, I got up late. I didn't daven in time. The next day, I had some business dealings and I wasn't so honest. I inflated the prices a little bit. I changed the scales. The day after that, it was before Shabbos, and I took Shabbos in a little bit late. I was very busy. I didn't stop working in time. And he's going through all the sins that he committed over the year. He reads the whole book. And he's crying the whole time, going through all of his sins. It takes him a couple of hours. He finishes the book, and then he takes out the second notebook. In the second notebook, he opens the second notebook, and he reads, that was all the sins that I did. But here are all the sorrows, here are all the problems that I experienced this last year. The day after Rosh Hashanah, my cow died. The next day, this was a flood, and some of my fields were ruined. The next day, some drunken peasants broke the windows of my inn. And he's going through and he's reading through all the sorrows that he experienced the last year. Finally, he finishes up both books, and he says, Hashem, listen. I didn't do my best. I obviously didn't do everything I was supposed to do. I didn't act properly this year. And, I did a lot of sins. But Hashem, you weren't perfect either. We have a second book over here full of all the problems you caused me this year. But you know what, Hashem? It's before Yom Kippur. I'm willing to forgive you for everything as long as you forgive me for everything. And he picks up both books, he swings them over his head, and he says, Zeh Chalifasi, Zeh Temurasi, Zeh Kaparasi, and he throws both books in the fire. And that's really our argument, our claim when we come in front of Hashem. We say, Hashem, we've experienced so, we haven't been perfect this year. But look at the circumstances, look at the problems that we faced this year, right? And the sins were caused by our circumstances. So Hashem, all we ask of you is next year, give us a happy, sweet year, get rid of all of our problems, and we'll be able to serve you so much better. Chaim, Chaim.